And today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 42. But basically, this is, as I say, Joseph. It's an account of a man called Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph was a man who was betrayed by his brothers. His brothers didn't like him. Well, that's an understatement. They really didn't like him. And they sold him into slavery. And he ends up being a slave in Egypt. While he's in Egypt, he is a slave in the household of Potiphar, a man called Potiphar. And while a slave there, he is falsely accused of a crime that he didn't commit. So he's an innocent man, but he is accused and convicted of a crime he did not commit. And as a result, he is then sent to prison. So here's Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, wrongly convicted, a slave in prison, and yet, throughout the text, we read the sentence, "But God was with him." Even in the midst of the difficulty he was experiencing, God was with him, and God was working all of these things for his purpose, because God had a plan. God was going to use this wrong done to him and the hardship he experienced, he was going to use it for good. And basically, the last few weeks and the upcoming weeks, we are really seeing God's purposes begin to unfold bit by bit. And that really began a couple of weeks ago, where Joseph is in prison. And basically what happens is he gets called up to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, because Pharaoh has a dream which he doesn't understand, and he's found out that Joseph can interpret dreams. And so Joseph, this imprisoned slave, comes before the king of Egypt, one of the most, if not the most powerful man at the time in the world, and he's come before him, and God enables Joseph to interpret the dream. And the dream was this. Basically, Joseph said, "Look, Pharaoh, your dream means this. There's going to be 7 years of famine. There's going to be 7 years of plenty. There's going to be 7 years of abundance in the land, but that is going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So this is the plan, a plan for salvation. Look, if you store during the years of plenty, so that you will have food during the times of famine." And Pharaoh hears this, he's amazed, like, wow, this is awesome, such wisdom. And he says to Joseph, "Joseph, I believe what you're saying, I believe this interpretation, and I need to put somebody in charge to look after the storing and everything, and the distribution of the food when the time comes. And Joseph, I want that person to be you. I'm going to make you second highest in command in Egypt. In essence, you're going to be the most powerful man, except for me. I'm going to be the only person above you." And in this crazy moment of reversal, Joseph goes from being this imprisoned slave to the second most powerful man in Egypt. And that is insane, this reversal. Absolutely incredible. And you have to step back and be like, wow, God is able to radically change the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But God isn't finished there. And you could easily think that's the end of the story, right? Because what we read of, as we saw last week, the 7 years of plenty happened. And they stored. And then we ended last week beginning to see the 7 years of famine begin. Just as Joseph had said, just as God had told Joseph this was going to happen. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And we could easily think, oh, maybe that's the end of the story, right? I mean, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Joseph is now, he is now in a palace, he now has a family, now has a new life. But no, the story doesn't end. And if anything, the most important and in the most radical things are going to take place. And that's what we're going to read about this week and in the coming weeks. So let us begin to read together and unpack some of this text. It's going to be a lot of narrative these next few weeks. So quite a bit of reading to get through, but it's all beautiful, beautiful stuff. So if you've got a Bible, please turn to Genesis chapter 42. So Genesis chapter 42. And this is what we read because the famine, when the famine comes, it doesn't just hit Egypt, but it hits the surrounding nations around the world. And so all these other nations that have been hit by the famine, they are now all turning to this one place where there's food, and that's Egypt, because Joseph knew and Egypt knew that the famine was coming, so they stored. So now everybody is coming to Egypt for food, and that includes Joseph's brothers. It says this in chapter 42 and verse 1. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. So the camera, it pans away from Joseph and focuses on his family, his brothers, the very brothers who sold him into slavery. And what we read of is that his family, they're in danger of starving. The famine's hit them too, and they're in desperate need of food. And so Jacob sends them to the one place where there is food, and that is to Egypt. And so we read verse 4, "But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan." So here's Jacob, and here's his sons, and basically Jacob is the father of Joseph. So here's Jacob, he has his sons, and he sends 10 of his sons to Egypt to go and get food, but he doesn't send one, and that one son that he doesn't send is Benjamin. You see, as we looked at right at the beginning, Joseph's family was a very broken family. And one of the ways in which it was broken was that Jacob had multiple wives, and of which he then had various children from those wives. So basically, the majority of Joseph's brothers were, in fact, his half-brothers, but Joseph did have one brother who had the same mother, and that was Benjamin. And Benjamin was Joseph's younger brother. So basically, in the wake of Joseph being sold into slavery, and basically Jacob, the dad, didn't know that Joseph had been sold into slavery because his brothers had told Jacob that he had died, he'd been killed, he'd been ravaged by animals. So here's Jacob, he thinks Joseph is actually dead, and Benjamin, in essence, becomes somewhat of the favourite son like Joseph. And as we see here, Jacob is worried about Benjamin. He's worried that, hey, what if Benjamin dies like Joseph did? And as I say, Jacob thought Joseph was dead. And that's because that's the story that his brothers gave Jacob. And so he sends these other brothers to get food, tells Benjamin to remain. And then these brothers, they make their way unknown to them that they are about to encounter the very brother that they sold into slavery all those years ago. Verse 6, "Now Joseph was governor of the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth." I just want to take a moment to marvel at the providence of God in this scene, because this is incredible. In need of food, they go to the only place where food is available, Egypt. And in Egypt, they are brought before the one who is in charge of the food, and that is Joseph, the very brother who sold them into slavery all those years ago. This is no coincidence. This is incredible that God would work out the circumstances so that the brothers who betrayed Joseph would come face to face with him. As I say, this is no coincidence. This is a divine appointment. And isn't it amazing when we have those moments, right, where when we end up unexpectedly meeting somebody in such a way where we're like, you know what, Lord, this is clearly of you. I remember not too long ago, I was cycling back home. Basically during lockdown, a couple of times what I'd do is I'd cycle to go and see Lois, and we'd like hang out in the park, and then I'd cycle back home. And basically during this long cycle, I'd basically cycle from Croydon to Putney, and I'll be honest, I used my dad's electric bike because that's much easier. It was saving my legs a bit, so that helped me pedal up the hills. But anyway, I'm cycling back, right? I only do this route once a week, and I've only really been doing that during lockdown. And I'm cycling back, and lo and behold, as I'm cycling, I see somebody in this area which I'm never around, and I only ever pass through it when I'm cycling, and I see one of the guys from U-Turn, which is like a rehab house we do a Bible study at. So I kind of pull over and I'm like, hey, and I start talking to him, and I'm like, hey, you know, what happened? You were at the rehab only a couple of weeks ago, and we had a chat, and I was able to pray for him and talk about Jesus with him, and you get moments like that where you're like, what are the chances that I would stumble and bump into this person in the most unlikely of places? I'm just like, this is no coincidence. And I love those moments where you're like, man, God, you've brought this together for a reason. What is it you have me to say in this moment? Or what is it you have me to do? How can I be a blessing in that moment? And this meeting here is no coincidence. Joseph saw his brothers, continues on, and recognized them. But he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. And then he said to them, where do you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. So roughly over 20 years have passed since they saw Joseph. So not only would Joseph have looked, 20 years older, but he would have also been dressed most likely as an Egyptian. And also the brothers they sold him into slavery, and they're like, we don't know what's happened to him. They assume that he had passed away. So you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the brothers here when it says that they don't recognize Joseph. It's because, look, the idea that the brother that they sold into slavery could be second in command of Egypt. I mean, that was impossible. So everything's like, man, they just can't recognize it's him. It's like, he looks completely different. And the idea that their brother could be in this position, I mean, that doesn't even cross their mind. It's impossible. And yet it's true. And although the brothers don't recognize Joseph, Joseph certainly recognizes them. But he chooses to keep his true identity hidden from them. And he's going to reveal that at a later date. And why? Why does he keep it hidden? Well, it appears that he keeps it hidden because he wants to test his brothers. He wants to see if these are the same men who betrayed him, or have they changed? Then Joseph, in verse 9 says this, then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them. So here's Joseph, and it says that he remembered the dreams. Now, to kind of understand that context, you would have to have been here a few weeks ago, right at the beginning of our study in chapter 37, when we're first introduced to Joseph. He had dreams, right, if you remember? Dreams in which his brothers were bowing down to him, and at the time, nobody knew the meaning or the significance of these dreams. But now, many years later, Joseph is beginning to see. He's beginning to see these dreams come to pass right in front of him. Because as I say, when he was a 17 years old, he had this dream that his brothers would bow down to him. And now, over 20 years later, here he is standing with his brothers bowing down before him. You see, going back to those dreams he had all those years ago, in that moment, or in those dreams, God was peeling back the veil, allowing Joseph to see what God knew and what he had planned all along. God knew his brothers would set him into slavery. God knew, and he would use it as part of his plan to save people. And I wonder what was going through Joseph's mind in that moment when he thinks back and he's like, no way. I dreamed this. I dreamed that my brothers would be bowing down to me. And what is this happening right in front of me? Over 20 years later, he finally realized what the Lord was showing him. And in the same way, God is often at work in our lives in many different ways which we can't see or grasp right now. But one day we will, even if that day be in eternity when we see him face to face. Because see, although Joseph is beginning to see bit by bit how God and what God was doing, he doesn't see everything yet. And to be honest, even when Joseph gets to the point where he dies, he does not see everything that God would bring about through the suffering that he brought Joseph through. Sometimes God is at work in many different ways which we just cannot see. But like Joseph, we can trust him that one day when we do look back and he reveals exactly what he was doing, exactly how he was at work. Back to our text. And what we see here is Joseph, as I say, he's testing his brothers, and this test is really going to continue for the next few chapters. And he says this to them in the second part of verse 9: "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." He begins to interrogate them, threatening them as hostiles. You want to see how they respond. And they say this: "And they said to him, 'No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies.' But he said to them, 'No, but you've come to see the nakedness of the land.' And they said, 'Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and no one is more.'" So Joseph is kind of playing this ruse, and he's kind of like pretending to be suspicious of them and accusing them of being spies. And how do the brothers respond? They're like, "Hey, no, we're not spies. We're servants. We know we've just come here for food. We don't mean any harm. We're not trying to spy on you. We're not a threat. And actually, we are 12 brothers." And I think that's really interesting. I don't know I think it's subtle, but I think it's an interesting remark. The fact that they are kind of identifying themselves as 12 brothers, including Joseph, right? Which we'll look at in a second. In essence, they're saying, look, hey, we are 12 brothers. and they will explain a bit more about how they think about Joseph at this time. But it says this, verse 14, but Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. And so he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. But you, go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me. So your words will be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. So, after a few nights in prison, Joseph agrees to let them all go except one. And basically what Joseph says is, look, I want you to go back, bring the youngest brother Benjamin to me, and then bring him back, and then I will release the one brother who I have kept as you've gone on your way. So that's in essence what Joseph says, and he basically says he does it because he wants them to verify they're telling the truth. I want you to know you're telling the truth. So bring me this youngest brother Benjamin. And now I really want you to see how the brothers respond, because it is so eye-opening, where it says this in verse 21. So that's what they did. The brothers agreed to this, and then in verse 21, then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. So here we kind of get the first insight into what the brothers are thinking and feeling about how they had treated Joseph. And they said, hey, look, we're truly guilty. And look at the way they describe it. We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. In essence, what the brothers think is this: man, we wronged our brother, and now we're facing it. Now it's come back to haunt us. In essence, is what they're saying. Man, we're going through this because of how we mistreated Joseph. And there's a couple of things I want us to notice. There seems to be like a genuine guilt, and we'll see kind of as the next chapters unfold, we'll see more of this. But man, the way in which it describes what Joseph went through. Joseph was in anguish, and Joseph was pleading with his brothers when they sold him into slavery. He's like, no, please don't do this. Please don't do this. And they didn't listen to those pleas. Such was their hate for their brother. And it continues, and it says this in verse 22. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the brother? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. So now Reuben steps up, one of the brothers. He's like, guys, didn't I tell you this? Did I tell you not to harm Joseph? And now, look, we're now facing judgment. This is all happening to us because of what we did to Joseph. And then we read this. Verse 23, but they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter, and he turned himself away from them and wept. Joseph is hearing this all going on. He's hearing these brothers bickering about themselves and talking about him. Right? Remember, the brothers don't know that's Joseph. They don't even know that this guy even understands them. And they're talking among themselves about Joseph. And Joseph himself is hearing this. And he's like, and he weeps. He begins to cry. Such is the emotion that he is going through in this moment as he processes the brothers who betrayed him, and they're right in front of him. Continues, then he returned to them again and talked with them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. So this is what Joseph does. Joseph gives a command, and he basically says, hey, look, we've given them grain to take with them, but basically what I want you to do, without the brothers knowing, I want you to put the money that they used to buy the grain, I want you to actually put it back. And I want you to hide it in the sacks of grain. And then we read what happens as a result. But as, verse 27, as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? So the brothers, they're freaking out. They're like, hey, what is our money doing back in our sacks? They're going to think, the Egyptians are going to think we stole from them. This is not good. All right, we're already on bad terms with them. We don't want to be on any worse terms. And we then read this as they approach their father Jacob to give him the news. Then they went to Jacob, their father in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men, for we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father, and one is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Then it happened, as they emptied their sacks, that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in the sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me. And you can imagine how Jacob is hearing this. I mean, he has never been the same since he thought that Joseph had died. Never been the same. And now he reads that Simeon has been taken away. And now what's going to happen to Benjamin? He doesn't want Benjamin to be affected as well. But Reuben steps up. And he says this, then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. So Reuben goes really far. He's like, hey, dude, you can trust me. Look, we'll bring back Benjamin. If we don't, you can even kill my own sons. I mean, Guys, that's a really strong promise to make. You got to be pretty hopeful. Not hopeful, but you got to be pretty confident you're going to fulfill that. But he said in verse 38, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my grey hair with sorrow to the grave." Jacob, he's like, man, I can't bear to lose another son. And he doesn't want to send him. And what we'll see next week is that Jacob will eventually concede, and we'll actually see how that comes about, because that's very interesting how it comes about. And eventually his brothers and Benjamin will go down. But here we are seeing the brothers being tested. How will they treat Simeon, right? Are they just going to leave him to kind of just stay in Egypt? They've got some food to keep them going. Are they just going to leave Simeon? And what of Benjamin? Do they really care for Benjamin? And as we'll see next week, the brothers will go down to get Simeon back. The brothers will bring Benjamin with them. And bit by bit, we will see the hearts of these men revealed. And why is this all taking place? God is setting the stage. This is a spoiler alert, guys, so sorry about this. But God is setting the stage for reconciliation and forgiveness. And God, as I said, the story did not end with Joseph rising to power and that was it. But God had a purpose and a plan for Joseph's family. And part of that plan is being reconciled to Joseph. And part of that plan is ultimately leading to the greatest salvation and the greatest Redeemer of all, which is Jesus. God is going to save the very... God is going to use Joseph to save the very brothers who betrayed him, sold him into slavery. He's going to do so to save them, and that's grace in itself. As a result of them being saved, our Saviour Jesus is going to come. And our Saviour Jesus is going to save those who betrayed him and those who hurt him, as in us. We've all betrayed Jesus through our sin. We've all hurt Jesus through our sin. But Jesus loved us enough that he was willing to go to a cross for us for a crime that he did not commit, so that he could bring about our salvation. Let us pray together.